from this to this, is both basic yet complicated. Let's break it down from the basic to the complicated. Today, we're getting down to the foundations of wine, the most basic possibly that you can get. We're gonna understand how wine is made. Hi there. If you're new here, or you just started down our wine novice path, let me introduce myself. I'm Jacqueline, and this is Our Glass of Wine, and we are here to pour a little bit of wine knowledge from our glass to yours. So there are different, let's say, colors, for simplicity's sake, of wine. The most wide categories being red and white. Now, the grapes chosen to make the wines do have a little bit of say in the final wine color, but the order of the certain steps will determine that color to some extent. So first, we're going to define the basic steps that are necessary for making wine, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty ways that they can be rearranged and combined to create the color in our glass. Farming and harvest. Let's start with the obvious. Wine is usually made from grapes, and those grapes don't just grow on trees, they actually grow on vines. Farming is an important aspect of winemaking, and that sometimes will get separated from the rest of the process. But truth be told, farming and the subsequent harvesting of the grapes is an important part of the winemaking process. After all, good wine will start in the vineyard with healthy vines and healthy grapes. Of course, farming can have many variations, from conventional to biodynamic, organic, and onwards and upwards. As well, harvesting. You can have machine harvested, hand harvested, small crates, big crates, you name it, there's an option. These are all decisions that can be made by the winemaker and farmer, depending on personal philosophies in winemaking. Processing. Once the grapes have been taken from the vines, comes the processing. We're going to see crushing, pressing, and fermentation. These are the steps that get shifted around based upon if you're making a white or a red wine. In most cases, when arriving in the winery from the vineyard, grapes will be destemmed. Then they might be crushed, where they will be smashed to release the juices inside the skins. In olden days, this was famously done by treading on them by feet, and this is still actually the case in port. Or the grapes might be immediately pressed. Pressing is when skins are slowly squeezed like a sponge, wringing out and separating the liquid from the skins. Winemakers can choose to perform varying degrees of pressure during pressing, from none at all to letting it free run, or to very, very heavy with pneumatic presses. Fermentation. Now, whether through crushing or pressing, we've got a bunch of juice, so it's time for fermentation. This is where the true magic of wine happens. The sugars that are present in the grape juice will be eaten by yeasts that are either added to the wine or already present on the grape skins. The yeasts ingesting the sugar will excrete heat and several compounds, including the two most important for us today, CO2 and alcohol. The CO2, or carbon dioxide, will become even more important when we talk about sparkling wines, which is going to be another video in the future, so be sure to subscribe to be notified when that video comes out. But for now, let's just pretend that it gets dispersed into the air and we don't think about it any longer. What we really are interested in here is the alcohol. Fermentation is actually sometimes a finicky process. You see, yeast are fairly picky and they like certain conditions to live. When fermentation temperatures are too low or too high, the yeast might die off before they get to eat up all the sugar, meaning you could be left with a sweet tasting wine. This can be done at times on purpose when winemakers want a sweet wine. But overall, fermentation for your average still wine will want to be fermented to dryness, meaning all the sugar has been consumed. This can take an average of 1 to 2 weeks. Might be a little more, might be a little less, depending on the grape and the sugar content at harvest. Once the fermentation is complete, we will have our liquid wine. And now comes the spice, aging and/or maturation. This is where wine can really diversify, and winemakers have a whole lot of options. This is the period where the wine will rest and mature after fermentation, but before going to market. Wine, with time and in certain conditions, will evolve and change. So what does this mean? It usually is referring to the flavors and aromas that can be sensed in a wine. So instead of smelling a fresh tart cherry, we might smell a cooked cherry jam. The way the wine feels on our mouth might change too, sometimes becoming more velvety when it's aged in a certain way. These aging and maturation times can be short, mere weeks, or they can be years. Wine also can be aged in different types of containers. Popular ones are stainless steel tanks, wooden barrels, and even the glass bottles themselves. Winemakers can choose the vessel and the time that the wine spends in it based on a couple of different factors. It might be the local laws, or some European wine laws actually have minimum aging requirements in certain types of containers. Or it might be personal preference for style. You see, the type of container is going to have a big effect on the wine inside it. We can largely classify them into two categories, ones that are inert and ones that allow micro-oxidation. Basically, let's look at options like stainless steel that are inert. This means the wine won't soak up any flavors or glean any flavors for them, and they are sealed so no oxygen can get in. This means that the wine will age and evolve much more slowly than in their other counterparts like wood barrels. But what is this micro-oxidation? Well, materials like wood barrels are not completely airtight, so small amounts of air or oxygen can get in and interact with the wine. Anyone that has left an open bottle of wine on the counter for one too many days will know. A lot of oxygen is a bad thing for wine, but the tiny bit that will pass through things like wood planks, actually it can give a lot of extra flavors and more complexity to an aging wine. As well, wood has another factor that can affect the wine. That's the wood. The wood itself will impart, let's say, and infuse the wine with certain aromas and flavors. This can be more or less depending on a lot of factors such as how much the wood of the barrel was toasted when it was made, how big the barrel is, because the bigger the barrel, the less wine by percentage is in contact with the wood, therefore less aroma. Or if the barrel has been previously used. The more use a barrel gets, the more impact it will have on the flavor of the wine. All of this is to say that the choice of the aging vessel and the choice to age at all is an important point in the winemaking process, as some grapes that are fermented in the same vats, coming from the same vineyard, yet aged differently, will come out vastly different wines. And even sometimes in cheaper wines, to get the effect of oak, things like oak chips or oak staves can be put in less expensive tanks of stainless steel to simulate those effects of oak aging without the cost of an expensive barrel. Time to sell. Once the winemaker has decided that their wine is ready, they will bottle and store the wine. Labels will usually be put on once the wine is getting sold, like sent to a shop or a distributor, so as not to damage labels during storage. Marketing too will happen now as sales teams work to move the wine from the winemaker's storage cellars to your hands and your glass. Now we've gone through all the steps that it takes to make the wine, but let's say the order is not necessarily a hard and fast rule. The order of the processing and fermentation will actually change based on what color wine we are making. Now, yes, a lot of color is based on the grapes. Red grapes tend to make a red wine and white grapes a white wine, but they can be processed differently to maximize their color. Basically, most grape pulp and juice, be it in red grapes or white grapes, is normally clear. What is colored is the skins. So, for example, in a white wine where we want a nice clear color, we don't really want the juice to touch the outer skins too much. For that reason, in a white wine, we are going to harvest, then press right away to separate the juice from the skins, and then we're going to ferment the juice without the skins. In the pressing, there should be enough contact to wash the natural yeasts present on the grape skins into the juice for the fermentation, but not enough contact that we're going to leave any kind of a deep color in the wine. In a red wine, we want lots of color. This means we want the juice to be in contact with the skins. So here, we're going to first crush the grapes, letting out all the juices and letting it soak the skins. Fermentation will usually happen with the skins and juices in contact, and this is known as maceration. Often during this stage, the skins will float to the top, so winemakers will have to be sure to constantly mix them back in to maximize that color extraction. But once fermentation is complete, usually a red wine is then pressed and drained off to age without the skins. Now, the exception to those are pink rosé wines, where they're kind of a middle ground. Here, they're made with red grapes, but they are usually made like a white wine, so pressed right away and fermented without the skins. Or they can be crushed first and skins and juice are left briefly in contact before pressing off in fermentation. It depends how much color is in the red skins to begin with. This ever so brief contact between the skin and juice will cause some coloration, but not total extraction, leaving us with the pretty pink colors we know and love. I know that was a lot, but how do you feel? We hope that after this video, you now have a basic understanding of the fundamentals of a basic winemaking process. As time goes on, we're going to dive more in depth to certain parts, like aging really deserves a whole series just by itself, honestly. So please let us know in the comments, what would you be most interested in learning first? Thank you for joining me today. I hope you learned something, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like below, and remember to subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified when more videos are released. If you are new to wine, then you might want to check out this video here. Or if you have the basics down, then check out this video here for a little bit more wine knowledge. And remember, I will see you again with another hourglass of wine. Cheers!